Tensions have continued to rise for a long time between the United States and Latin American cartels, who have made it their life mission to commercialize sections of the United States as a part of their opioid trade. While the United States has reportedly tried diplomacy, it hasn't worked so far. Ergo, a resort to violence seems to be on the cards, with the United States reportedly looking to flex its aerial superiority one more time. What implications will this have on the cartels? Is there a chance that the cartels surrender or retaliate? Join us as we discuss a potential fighter jet hit from the United States on Latin American cartels. Over the years, tensions between the United States and cartel-dominated sovereign states in Latin America, including Mexico and Venezuela, have continued to fester. While the affected countries have reportedly engaged in diplomatic discussions to turn the situation around, with the United States offering its massive military might to combat their problem, the affected Latin American countries have consistently refused. However, questions continue to linger behind the scenes. Why would they refuse help from one of the three most powerful nations in the world? Consistent speculations swirling around the geopolitical discourse have been absolutely stunning, with rumors of a possible joint operation between these transnational cartels, who have put the governments of their respective sovereign states in a limbo. Ergo, they are afraid of taking them on. While there is no real proof or evidence that backs up these speculations, they refuse to go away. However, one thing remains consistent. Latin America was the center of opioid trading, and the federal governments of the affected nations have refused help from the United States, whose teeth are set on edge, despite the Latin American countries being the ones who ate the sour grapes. For some context, the United States Drug Enforcement Agency, popularly called the DEA, has finally figured out that an influx of fentanyl opioids is taking over the American social space and taking the lives of many. It was a difficult find because the United States used to reliably prescribe it as a drug to its citizens, and it was available as a common over-the-counter prescription, at least until they found out that it was addictive. The Latin American cartels immediately jumped on the addictive feel of the pill and found ways to create and commercialize it. At first, the opioid was sold in large quantities in the Latin American countries, but the economic advantage was far less compared to what it could be in a country with a better gross domestic product, or GDP average, like the West, especially the United States. The financial and economic motivation was enough for the Latin American countries to devise plans for a fire sale of the opioid, which would be ferried through the United States-Mexico border. The cartels were extremely smart in building a demand and supply chain in the United States, inverting the forces perfectly. First, they supplied, creating awareness of a new pill in town, driving up the demand, ergo, driving up the price. One of the first opioid waves in the United States post-war was a perfectly planned distribution from the heroin retailer of the old Colombian transnational criminal organizations, TCOs, which was brought into the United States, resulting in increased heroin use and adverse consequences in the United States. Following the massive heroin consumption in the United States between the 80s and the 90s, courtesy of the Colombian transnational criminal organizations, the Mexican cartels soon took over the market in the early 2000s. First, they pressed illicit fentanyl into prescription pills, using them as counterfeits in over-the-counter prescriptions, slowly gaining serious ground over the Colombian heroin dominance. This mini-turf war over opioid dominance in the United States between the Colombian and Mexican cartels lasted a long time between the 2010. However, it was not long before the Mexican cartels, with the backing of Chinese gangs, perhaps the triads who reportedly helped them secure the chemical needed to produce this counterfeit fentanyl, took over the Colombian cartel-controlled areas in the United States, taking over a working operation that has successfully destabilized the mental and physical health of citizens and denizens of the United States. As the years rolled by, the United States caught a whiff of the situation, with the death toll getting increasingly difficult to ignore. According to statistics from between 2021 and 2022, over 100,000 people died in the United States as a result of fentanyl overdose. But what makes fentanyl so dangerous and different from other types of opioid addiction waves that the United States used to have? Fentanyl is one of a class of many drugs known as opioids, which are used for pain relief. They can also be addictive. The key way in which fentanyl differs from more familiar opioids, like morphine, codeine, or even heroin, is potency. Potency refers only to the amount of a substance needed to produce a certain effect. Fentanyl is 100 times more potent than morphine. This means that if about 10 milligrams of morphine is needed to produce pain relief, only 1/10 of 1 milligram of fentanyl, which is about 0.1, is needed to produce the same effect. Few people have access to a scale sensitive enough to accurately measure amounts that small. Hence, there is a chance that little bits of miscalculations could be dangerous and almost fatal. Fentanyl was never some new drug, but the deliberate decision of the United States medical specialists to make it inaccessible to avoid addiction forced users to switch to heroin, which provides the same effect but is much cheaper. However, now the third wave is here, with fentanyl substituting for heroin and the Mexicans taking the market once again from the Colombian transnational criminal organizations. The reasons for this switch are not yet fully understood, but it is thought that in recent years, it has become much cheaper to produce illicit fentanyl rather than heroin for various reasons, especially since the Mexican cartels found support from across Latin American gangs and the Chinese. But how has the United States reacted to the sheer audacity of the Latin American cartels to continue their opioid trade within the shores of the United States? The military accomplishments of the United States have been a common staple in its description. While they have been known to keep the peace in countries, flexing their military might and butting in when necessary to stop wars at their base, even before they start. But despite the United States' ability to keep the peace in foreign countries and butt in between warring countries, with their superior military being their greatest fear factor, it is quite shocking that they are unable to completely solve their opioid problems, especially when they know exactly where they come from. Yet they seem incapacitated to do anything major about it. Why have they chosen to fight with one hand tied behind their backs? Under Article 2, Chapter 4 of the United Nations Charter, a sovereign state is not allowed the right to use or threaten to use force against another sovereign state, which by extension protects the sovereignty of states and keeps international relations as diplomatic as possible. While there have been cases where diplomacy fails and countries resort to war, the United Nations Charter and other laws applying to international relations and diplomacy demonize the concepts of asymmetrical warfare when certain conditions aren't met under international and humanitarian law. Asymmetrical warfare is an absolutely different beast, owing to its flexibility and contextual difference, which can tilt the right and wrong on different sides of the pendulum. For example, in a war between a nation-state and a non-state entity like a cartel, which is residing in a smaller sovereign state, that is in contrast with the military strength of a state the size of America. The stronger sovereign state in terms of military and technology is judged by the United Nations by the tools with which they used to fight the war, and if they got the permission of the smaller sovereign state before they brought their military, else it is an unlawful invasion. Ergo, this jurisdictional impasse creates a bit of difficulty for the United States to simply go into Latin American countries and stomp out their problems. Hence, they tried something different. This time, the United States government tried to reach out to its closest neighbor, from which a massive portion of the poisonous fentanyl gets into their state, Mexico, offering them a chance to have them share information about the whereabouts of some of the cartels, including the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco New Generation cartel, information that the Mexican government has repeatedly said that they do not have. While many believe that the president of Mexico at the time, Andrés Manuel López Obrador, was going to jump at the chance to have the United States on board, he stuck with his hugs not bullets policy of avoiding clashes with the cartels. In the past, he has said, "You cannot fight violence with violence." And on other occasions, he has argued the government has to address the causes of drug cartel violence, ascribing them to poverty or a lack of opportunities, other than just an innate willingness to be a menace. Having failed to secure a partnership with President Andrés Manuel López, who seemed unwilling to give up the cartel members to the United States, the cartels got even more brazen, attempting new ways to distribute their fentanyl, but in conjunction with other gangs from Latin American countries, who deal in all sorts of narcotics. Although the United States ranks very high on the list of the most well-guarded nations in the world, with well-trained security filling all the spots of entry in a bid to protect the interests of the state, the cartels, who have recently upped their game using all forms of transportation, including drones and submarines, have devised a way to control illicit maritime drug flows. Owing to the cartels' decision to work together towards achieving the same goals, which is to get their products to the most profitable country in the world for narcotics, they easily smuggle $100 billion worth of illicit narcotics to the United States every year. As expected, United States intelligence and law enforcement have been working overtime to combat the seamless flow of these narcotics, but they have come up short, failing massively to stop the largest shipments from not just getting into the United States, but also being easily distributed across the borders. Maritime drug trafficking involves the cultivation, manufacturing, transnational smuggling, and distribution and sale of narcotics over the seas. Latin American countries such as Peru, Ecuador, Colombia, and Mexico are the largest sources of illegal narcotics to the United States. Transnational criminal organizations in these countries use independent resources to facilitate transportation, especially with vessels like go-fast boats or sometimes semi-submersibles. But more importantly, it is a perfectly organized crime. Hence, it makes it difficult to track them down at the source. For some context, entities all over the world spam their narcotics in every country, especially the United States. While there are so many narcotic dealers around the world, the greatest chunk of these narcotics, including heroin, the white powdered substance, and fentanyl, are all produced in Peru, Bolivia, Colombia, and Mexico, making them one huge transnational organized gang of criminals. After production, the transnational criminal organizations use their resources to connect and operate a supply chain that takes their products out of their respective countries and into the United States, where they have their target audience. While transporting through air and land has become a serious difficulty, as it mostly leads to a firefight with the United States border security and bloodshed follows, harming their business, an unmanned sea behemoth moving across the coastlines and ports without being spotted was the real game changer. Although it involves risks of products like the white powdered narcotics getting ruined if they somehow get touched by water, it reduces visibility, meaning there are fewer firefights and little to no lives are lost on their side of the spectrum. During the Prohibition era in America, bootleggers used to have low-profile riverboats trying to ship the alcohol, which was banned at the time, and then technology and mechanical engineering improved with go-fast boats coming into the fray, symbolizing just how much America has been through when it comes to smuggling. However, the development of sonar and radar technology made even go-fast boats detectable, rendering them useless for a smuggling operation. The cartels, who have become wise to their ways, decided to build something more undetectable even with sonar and radar technology. Ergo, the birth of the narco submarines. The narco submarine became a popular gear used directly for narcotic shipment by the transnational criminal organization since the 1990s. As the years rolled by, the cartels easily transported huge tons of narcotics, ranging from opioids to fentanyl and marijuana, almost without detection. The narco submersibles are rumored to be nearly fully submersible in order to reduce the likelihood of detection by visual, radar, sonar, or infrared systems. More importantly, the cargo capacity varies widely with vessel size. Although these semi-submersibles were created to get completely under the ocean, they are sometimes brought up to the surface to avoid sinking, risking visibility. However, with the advancement of technology and engineering, some contemporary narco subs are capable of crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Although the Atlantic Ocean-capable semi-submersible was an improvement on what they used to have in the 90s, the transnational criminal organization, wary of the threats of the United States on their business, decided to invest more into their semi-submarines, with hopes of finally getting completely submersible submarines. Following a consistent barrage of private investments into their narco subs, there were reports of a sighting in the mid-20s, indicating that the cartels had finally made a breakthrough in creating vessels that are durable enough for their operators to attempt voyages across the Pacific to Oceania. Although that was a massive achievement for the cartels, it was an eyesore for countries whose coastline they cruise with this fully submersible submarine, especially the United States, where they sell most of their narcotics. While the cartels have found their footing on the seas, ferrying narcotics via the ocean and the land almost effortlessly, the United States calmly formulated plans and policies that could finally level the playing field. Consequently, the United States improved the radar and sonar technology available to the Coast Guards, especially since they were the first line of defense against maritime narcotic flow. Although the Coast Guards have had some success heavily celebrated in the United States, where they intercept these narco subs, it hasn't completely solved the problem of maritime narcotics flows, with more registered numbers of narcotics entering into the United States via the oceans. Following the consistent failures to identify the narco subs, with only a bit of success here and there, the United States has been rumored to decide to throw caution to the wind. But what might be stopping them? The United States has never been found wanting in aerial dominance, as symbolized by their most recent airstrike against Iran, using the strategic B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, which effectively took out strategic landmarks in Iran during Operation Midnight Hammer on June 22, 2025. While it had geopolitical implications, it was also a reminder of just how capable they are of nuking the cartels to dust should they decide to let loose, throwing the United Nations Charter Article 2, Section 4 to the wind and damning the consequences. However, international laws and diplomacy have often stopped them in their tracks, at least until recently, when rumors of another narco submarine with the biggest shipment of narcotics, opioids, and fentanyl to have ever graced the surface of the earth, making its way towards the United States. Although these reports are unconfirmed, the rumors continue to grow stronger, with more speculations going around the dark web on just how massive it could be. Are there rules that stop a military engagement on the narco submarine? In a bid to ensure fairness and protection of life, regardless of whose it is, ranging from hardened criminals to saints, there are international laws and guidelines that thwart huge plans, especially when the war is semantically asymmetrical. The narco submarines are not retrofitted with weapon systems that could take on a United States military approach and win. Therefore, using military-grade weapons would be like bringing a chainsaw to a nail fight, which is completely against the rules of engagement and humanitarian laws. Although these laws exist to protect lives, the United States continues to lose the lives of its citizens because of an opioid trade from Latin American countries, which has completely invaded their social space, claiming the lives of old and young while driving up crime rates. These continuous bombardments from the maritime narcotics trade have been rumored to have hit the United States so hard this time, and they are considering unleashing a carrier-based fighter jet, with one name recurring all the time, the F-35 Lightning C. The speculated intention is to unleash the fighter jet from the U.S. Carl Vinson CVN-70 on the Colombian Solidarity International Bridge, where the United States Customs and Border Protection officers seized $1.5 million in the white-powdered narcotics. The seizure occurred on June 22, 2025, when a CBP officer referred a 2006 utility trailer for secondary inspection. Very quickly, a K9 and X-ray inspection led to the discovery of 50 packages containing over 110 pounds of narcotics within the trailer. Following the incredible amount of shipment that was intercepted, the speculations for a possible release of the fighter jet at the Colombian port to destabilize their narcotic operation got even stronger. Whether or not the United States decides to go through with the rumored plan and deal with the humanitarian laws and the United Nations later, or keep negotiating a way to get military presence in Mexico with President Claudia Sheinbaum, who has flatly refused, remains to be seen. Thanks for watching. While you are still here, click on the link on your screen to check out another of our videos. See you there.